Welcome back, everyone, to the Plains on the Prairie podcast. I am Max.
And I'm Sam.
And today we are on episode 6 of our North Dakota ACES series.
Gone fast.
It has gone fast. And, I'm really excited about this episode today. Pretty high-ranking individual. I think he was the commander of, his combat squadron, if I remember correctly.
He was, yeah.
Yeah. So today's subject is Lieutenant Commander Leonard Check. Pretty interesting guy. I know before we had started, Sam, you were mentioning there's a little bit of overlap with some of the campaigns that he fought in.
There is. So this video or this podcast on video might be a little shorter because of that. We can dive back into it, but if you want a little bit more info on the campaigns, check out our last episode on Clarence Borley, and that one
we'll mention he was deeply fighting in the Formosa area or stuff.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that and just kind of we'll dive into it a little bit, but just if you want to listen in more on that campaign on Formosa and on Leyte Gulf, go ahead and give episode 5 a listen.
Perfect.
So
cool. If you're ready, I'm ready.
Yeah, let's dig into it.
Let's do it. So Leonard Check was born on March 4th, 1911 in Berwick. I hope I'm saying that right. Berwick, North Dakota, just north central part of the state. I'd say a little bit up past Rugby. I know I have a couple friends that are from Rugby, and that's about the closest I've been. I mean, it is the center of the continental United States, so
disputed, but
disputed, but I would say so. They have the geographic marker. But I saw that he spent most of his young life growing up in Williston.
Yes.
Yep. So I have not been to Williston. Maybe I have been to Williston. I can't remember, but
really out of the way.
It really is out of the way. But what makes Leonard interesting is that he always had, I'd say, military was his
wanted
end
to
goal.
serve. Yes.
In 1931, I believe he enlisted in the 164th Infantry Regiment of the North Dakota Army National Guard, which I should mention, I'm actually reading their history book on called Citizen Soldiers right now. So when I saw that he had been a prior member of that was pretty cool. I'm currently on the interwar chapter. I just finished World War One. So
yeah, I need to get that book. You found it, I suppose, on eBay or something. Out of here.
Someone had donated an extra copy here,
nice.
And we already had one in the museum's library, so it worked out.
Perfect.
But yeah, after his tenure with the North Dakota Army National Guard ended, he enlisted in the normal, just regular active duty army, which is also a very different. Like usually it's, normal active duty army and then National Guard. So going from National Guard to, active duty is pretty wild.
Right. A little backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't find when he got out of the active duty. But I know after his army tenure, then he enlisted in the Navy. And I think we found that he was just immediately assigned to pilot training. And after training was assigned to what, VB6 or 7?
Yeah, VB6 aboard the Enterprise. So he went the bomber route before he became a fighter ace, which is kind of interesting. I've read many stories about bomber pilots or scout pilots kind of lying about having fighter experience. So there's this one guy, he was mentioned in that Fabled 15 book that Borley was a part of. He was a Kingfisher pilot, and he shot down a Zero with a Kingfisher. And he just ended up kind of snaking his way into fighters, saying he's got an aerial victory
in a Kingfisher,
which is, I think, more impressive than getting a kill in a Wildcat.
I was going to say that's very impressive. But yes, and he was in the Navy pre-Pearl Harbor, right?
Harbor.
So actually, I think my research, he was on. You said the Enterprise while it was on its way to Pearl Harbor, or when it was out doing maneuvers during the attack.
Yes.
Yeah. So he could have, he would have been there had the carriers been in.
Well, and that's still one of the biggest what ifs of World War II history is like, what if all of those carriers,
if they had been lined up? Absolutely.
Yeah, but thankfully he missed out on that. He was on the Enterprise for 1940 to 42, so quite almost, or just a little over 2 years, March 13th to March 16th.
And what combat would he have seen during that time, or would it have
if any, it would have been nuisance raids,
just patrols and stuff like that?
Yeah,
gotcha.
So nothing too much, probably anti-sub scouting and stuff like that. They most likely flew. Dauntless is the majority of his time because 1940 they were just starting to get introduced late 1940. So probably some BT-1s, Northrop BT-1s, or other scouts. The interwar, there's a lot of different type of aircraft out there. So and then after 42 he was sent back stateside to become a flight instructor at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi down in Texas. This is where we'll kind of reiterate the doctrine of the U.S. pilots, or U.S. how they dealt with pilots is if you had any experience in combat, you came back and taught that instead of then you're always keeping fresh pilots, but you're also getting experience and bringing experience to the new pilot or new recruits, and your attrition isn't as hard as like the Japanese were.
Because I know when we've talked in the past, you said that the Japanese, they sent their, like
their best.
China campaign, like Pearl Harbor, Midway survivors. They never got sent back.
Well, right.
It was always combat for them. And when they were inevitably shot down and killed, you didn't have that experience to train,
Right. And going in, of course, the Japanese had the advantage coming in with their experience. I mean, they could have at least had 4 years of combat experience with the Sino-Japanese War starting, the disputed time starting in 1937 or Khalkhin Gol in 1939. So there's plenty of opportunities for them to get combat. But yeah, thankfully, the U.S. had the manpower and just the will, along with this doctrine that really all made a good mix. But he did that until late 1943. And then he was given command of VF-7, flying F-6F-3s and 5s aboard the USS Hancock.
And the 5s would have been brand new at that time,
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. The 3s were coming in June, started around, or the 5s were starting to come in around June of 44. But yeah, he more than likely was equipped with a 3 at the end, or just as he was taking command.
Gotcha. And it said that, so his second combat tour would have started beginning in October of 1944. Yeah. And let's see, it said that his first kill, wasn't that, if I remember correctly, it was against, was it a Betty?
Yep, a G4M Betty.
Yep. So, one of those Japanese land-based. Yep. Could you really call him a heavy bomber?
It was probably more of I'd classify it more as a medium bomber. It was naval.
It was?
Yep. So the Bettys were a naval aircraft.
I did not know that.
Or the Naval Air Force. So yeah, that was his first kill. All of this was pretty much off of the Philippines at this time, part of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and the largest naval engagement of history, really. So
for real.
or of World War II for sure. I mean, maybe Spanish Armada type thing would probably amount to more, but
flying machines.
But on scale of like destruction and just all that. Yeah, this takes the cake. So yeah, that was his first kill, taking down a Betty.
And then a couple days later, intercepted an attack force that was heading towards his carrier, and he shot down, was it 4 Vals on that mission?
Yeah.
And Vals, they were the dive bombers.
Yep, the fixed gear. They were getting pretty antiquated by this point in the war, but
I mean, aircraft is still a threat.
The production of Japanese aircraft was significantly lower than that of the U.S. The U.S. was always able to keep modern aircraft on the field.
Gotcha.
Japanese, not so much at this point in the war.
Let's see here, because Vals, if I remember correctly, were dive bombers.
Dive bombers, yep.
Judy's, were they early or late war torpedo bombers?
They were late war dive bombers, actually.
Oh, they were?
So the Judy, the D4Y, Yokosuka D4Y, Judy. And then you're thinking the Jill, the Kate.
Jill and the Kate.
The Kate came first.
Gotcha.
And then the Jill replaced that.
Gotcha.
B6N, B6N Jill.
This is why we have you on the podcast, Sam, because you know all sorts of Japanese stuff.
Can't speak it, but that's important.
Hey, that's you know the reporting number or codes.
Yes.
Kind of like, the Russian ones.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not allowed to say MiG-15's reporting number.
Sure. Yeah. We don't need the FCC coming after us.
So let's see. He shot down the 4 Vals, making him an ace. And then was it that same mission that he was credited with damaging an improbable 0?
Yes.
Busy
day.
No kidding. We've had this conversation, and with some of those guys how many of our aces have scored 5 or 4 in a day?
They've all gotten, Bloomer got 4 in a day.
Yeah.
Register got 4 in a day. Borley got 4
They make it sound like it's easy.
Yeah, it's just insane. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, and then let's see, in the following month in November, he managed to shoot down a Tojo just south of Manila, and it crashed, I think, into the Manila Bay. And then not even it literally says here minutes later scored an Oscar also that went down into Manila Bay. I feel like we could dedicate an episode to talking just about the different variants of Japanese aircraft that they had.
He's got such a mixed bag here. I mean, it was a mixed bag at that point.
Yeah.
It was where you had like Guadalcanal is mostly Japanese naval aircraft. In the Philippines, you had quite the mix. Like
Gotcha.
here, so far he's at 7 victories and 1 probable. So we have the Zeke, the Vals, and the Betty. Those are all naval, but then you get the Tojo and Oscar, so you're starting to mix it up.
And those are Japanese Army or Air
the Tojo and the Oscar, yes.
Okay, gotcha. So was the Japanese Air Force very similar to the American Air Force of World War II, where it was a subsidiary of the Army?
It was of the Army and the Naval Air Force. So they actually had 2 subsidiaries. One was Imperial Japanese Naval Air Force and Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. So
kind of like a naval aviator and Army Air Force
exactly.
pilot.
There was a difference. Okay. And there was a huge rivalry, more than any other other country.
I can imagine, absolutely. And let's see, in December of 1944, he shot down another Betty and another Zero, and then that brought his total to 9. And then on January 3rd, 1945, he got his final kill against George.
Yes, and that's
holy names.
Really impressive. Yeah,
yeah,
a lot of first names here.
I'm for real. Unfortunately, the next day on January 4th, 1945, Lieutenant Commander Leonard Check was killed in a midair collision. I don't know how do you pronounce Haido?
Yeah.
Haido. I'm going to say Haido. Probably. Haido Airfield in Formosa. Yeah.
And it happens. I mean, the weather was poor. Yeah. You're not going to see someone else in a cloud. It's kind of a go in at your own risk.
And I couldn't find any information if it was it another Hellcat or an enemy air?
I found friendly in one source, but it wasn't very solid, so I'm not sure.
Who knows?
But yeah, he was quite the decorated airman as well.
I mean, not just, a double ace, but you have to think he'd been in the military since the early 30s, and he got tired of the National Guard. He didn't want to make a career out of he could have very well gone into Army Air Force pilot training.
Right.
Didn't do that. And, that's one of those things that's unfortunately lost to history, is we'll never know, because wasn't, who was our, Register was Navy. Who was,
Cohen was everything.
Yeah.
Eagle Squadron.
Yep. And he was turned down by the Army Air Force.
Right. So
he went to Canada. Yeah.
You take matters into your own hands.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this guy, it's just, he dedicated a good chunk of his life already at this point. He went to the service at 17. He was 34 when he was 33, killed. I guess. Yeah. But still, that's old.
That is.
People younger than us were look at Borley, 20 years old.
I know.
Town 5. It's just
that always blows my mind. Is you see some of the ages of these aces when they were, racking it up, and
we've only ever seen them as old men.
No,
and it's just So,
so moving on to the second part of the show, VF7.
Yep, VF7 Fighting 7.
Yeah,
part of Air Group 7 was established on January 3rd of 1944. So basically right away, Check was the first commander of the squadron. And it was aboard the USS Hancock CV-19. So that was an Essex class carrier, similar to, the Essex. Yeah. So that we talked about probably last episode.
Yeah.
The most produced
carriers.
Yeah. And they were first equipped with the F6, F3s, and then moved into the 5s. And they embarked to the Pacific in late 1944. They did an Atlantic tour, a short, really? Kind of basically patrol type thing there. And really not that, I couldn't find any victory totals or anything like the other squadrons we've been able to find, like the 15 last episode was.
Yeah. There's quite a bit of information.
Exactly. Yeah.
For sure. Do you know, was Check commanding VF7 when he was killed?
I'm assuming so. I didn't find anything, but usually
if he
would have been promoted up. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so he was most likely squad commander, and then the unit was disestablished after the war, just like many other units in 1946.
See, I always thought that a lot of those Navy squadrons, like the ones that are still around, they have such incredible histories. And, I know the Air Force likes to maintain a lot of those legacies that existed with their fighting squadrons of the Second World War. Obviously, a global war, you're going to have more squadrons than you need in peacetime. So, some of those ones that would deactivate. Yep, exactly. But with the Navy, when you're sending every squadron into combat and they're having these incredible track records, like how you can't preserve the legacy of all. So a lot of the squadrons we have today were born from, an original number, yada, 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 however many years ago during the Second World War. And the Navy, VF7, just like the previous Navy squadrons that we've talked about, they just couldn't quite make it.
Right.
Not to say that, in the future,
they could.
It's been done before.
It's been done, and, you never know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then other notable engagements. We talked about Leyte Gulf. We talked about Formosa. Formosa was just, it was a rough one. A lot of casualties in the air. Borley was a Formosa casualty earlier than Check. Thankfully, Borley made it out. But Formosa was just we talked about it last time. There were more bases at Formosa than they had originally anticipated. It wasn't well mapped. There's 26 bases. They assumed there was like
Japanese base.
Yeah, I'm kind of shooting from the hip on the number, but I think they assumed it was like 11 or 12. Yeah. So it was just a lot more stout than they thought. But and then VF7 also later on provided air cover over Okinawa and Iwo Jima. So probably pretty rough air campaigns there too, from a ground attacks perspective. So, but that's a really interesting one here.
And then the final one, I know we couldn't find any surviving Hellcats in the markings, but what I thought was cool about their tail markings that you might be able to explain is is it a right side up or upside down horseshoe?
It depends on how you look at it. I would consider it looks like the Indianapolis Colts for football fans.
And so I think that's right side up. But was that common for squadrons?
For that, they would have tail codes or tail markings. They the Navy is very strict about nose art. So look over there. If you look on the shelf there, so to explain it, there's the VF-27 off of or VF-26. I forget the number, but it's off of the USS Princeton. But they had the cat mouth markings, and the
Navy hated that.
The Navy hated that. So some of them had bloodshot eyes like this, and they all had the dripping blood off of it. But the Navy hated that. So what happened was the Princeton was the only light carrier to be sunk by conventional methods. A Judy actually dropped one right through the deck. And,
really?
It sank. They had to scuttle it. So all of the Princeton aircraft are upright at that point, and they had to land on Essex and other larger carriers. The Essex skipper was so disgusted that that night they had to paint over all the shark mouths. So it wasn't regulatory. So, but they would have a tail marking. This plane itself isn't.
I was gonna say, other than the nose art, there's a lot of twos on it.
Yes.
So
so there's
it's got even got the radar dish. I feel like
the threes didn't. But it was kind of a Navy thing. The only drawback, if you would say, to the Navy was that they weren't allowed to have much for nose art other than like Mincy, just like a
name or something.
A name,
like
no raunchy nose art or anything like that. So, but not much on specific VF7 markings, but any gloss sea blue F6 F5 is pretty darn close.
I was gonna say, other than that horseshoe shape, do you know any other shapes that would have been utilized by like a sister unit or a squadron?
I don't know the squadrons on top of my head, but I've seen clovers. I've seen just checkers. Like there's like a one where there's like a white checker in kitty corner and then just
corner of the tail.
Gotcha. So there's a lot out there. There's at the end of the war, there's just a ridiculous amount of squadrons on escort carriers, light carriers, and just standard carriers in general. So there's just a
Absolutely.
lot. So, but yeah, this was a fun one to research. We have 4 left. That's it.
Four that we know of.
4 that we know of.
Yeah.
We'll see. I've been looking in my free time a little bit, finding a lot of Minnesota.
That could be another
Could
episode.
be another series.
Like
yeah.
that Aces book that I was telling you about before we started recording. Even if it doesn't have the signatures, I might want to pick that one up.
Yeah.
That one, who knows? There might be another one that we might have missed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Do we want to talk just briefly about some news?
Yeah. So both of us ended up at Battle Lake.
Yeah.
This was after we recorded the Borley videos or podcast. So that was a good time. You got a nice way of getting there.
Yep. I got to ride down in the back seat of Harvard, basically.
Mm-hmm.
AT6G model, I think, is what by Air Force conversion standards, whatever you want to call it. But yep, I want to thank Kelly P, who is a board member at the Fargo Air Museum, for giving me that chance. It was awesome. It was incredible. Just my first. I know we talked about it in a previous episode, but my first Warbird flight was in the L5 at Wings of the North's Air Expo. That's a light plane. And the T6, that was just
different.
Strong. Like you could feel the power when you're in that plane.
Well, and you've had quite the year for Warbirds.
It has been
3 months.
Yeah. I was joking. I guess I gotta wear my little 5 L5 shirt more often when I'm at these air shows and whatnot. But yeah, I don't take that for granted. It was a very incredible experience. I got to say it was for the museum, which it was. We took a lot of film and promoted it, so it was very cool. Yeah,
there's a lot of really good turnout despite the heat. It was really hot that day, but we had 2 Stearmen show up, 3 T6s.
We had, when we arrived,
there was the you guys were the first T6.
Yeah, we were the first T6,
and then there was the South African.
The South African
Lindemans.
one showed up. Yep, the Lindemans. I hope I'm saying their name right. We've interviewed them before.
Then
the
one from Wapaton.
Yep,
showed up.
In the markings of a forward air controller one. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
We'd love to see more.
Oh yeah.
Won't say no to them.
Yeah,
so.
The T6 Thunder used to fly out there all the time. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But that's a can't miss one every single year. So I'm excited for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. They're hoping to get a couple more big name museums that are in Minnesota.
It would be nice. Yeah.
If you know who we're talking about.
Oh yeah.
I'd say one more thing that I'd like to talk about is the recent trade, so to speak. This might ruffle some feathers, but that's why we're here. We want to talk about it. So the recent acquisition of a PT-17 by the National Museum of the United States Air Force. And before we begin, this PT-17, it's not just any old PT-17. It is, as far as I know, one of 2 surviving PT-17s that is known to have flown and trained with the Tuskegee Airmen, the famous all-black fighter squadron of the Second World War. The National Museum of the United States Air Force really wanted this plane, and they were willing to trade. I don't know the specifics behind the condition of the of the trade, but they traded a bubble top P-47D for it. I've seen differing comments about how people think about this. Sam, I kind of wanted to pick your brain, and I'll provide my 2 cents on it. Sure. But on one hand, I see this trade as crazy a little bit. Like I get the historical significance of the PT-17, but for a multi-million-dollar restoration project that is the P-47D, I find it very incredible. And I get the ball was probably in, because the rumor is that it's going down to Florida to be restored to airworthy condition and then go to the Collings Foundation, because they were the original owners of the PT-17. So my guess is that the ball was completely in the Collings Foundation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And well, because they have to fund the airworthiness.
Exactly.
So.
And they're like,
yeah, my opinion on it, I wouldn't say I'm die hard on a side.
Mhm.
You
I'm
know,
not
it is
either,
what it
yeah.
is. Yeah, some people need more to worry about, I think.
I know. Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I don't know. It on paper, yeah, it's for sure lopsided. That's
Mhm.
a one-sided trade money wise.
Yep.
But it is the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. Again, it is at 47 with some interesting history. But
there's no what on the other
Yeah.
hand that I see more of that I would say that I'm more on this side is you're trading a documented historical aircraft that has some incredible ties to the history of the US Army Air Force
Mhm.
and the American military as a whole versus a P-47 that never flew with the United States Army
Exactly.
Air Force, or if it did, it was briefly and then sold off to one of our allies and then just repainted to be a P-4070. I see a lot of comments that are saying, like, what does this mean for the restoration group? They should be proud of their work,
Mhm.
but at the same time, would you rather see something that has documented history with the U.S. Army Air Force instead of something that's just painted?
It's more of the story for a museum as high profile as the Air Force
yes,
Museum.
exactly.
They can get a 47.
Yep.
They
They're
already have one, I assume.
they have a Razorback.
A Razorback, yeah,
Yep.
and I get it. I get both sides,
Mhm.
but
And we got to
I think
think,
the significance of the 17
yes,
is more important.
and we got to think how many P-47s are, that the Air Force Museum has access to parts wise that we don't know about.
Mhm.
The Air Force Museum, the board of directors and the people that are involved there, they strike me as very smart individuals.
Oh, yeah.
They wouldn't just give away a 47 without having at least an idea like, hey, we already have what is the bubble top? Is it also a D version?
Could be a D or an N.
A D or an N. And then the Razorback
Was a D or a B.
Okay.
But most likely a D.
Gotcha.
It's just like a later model of the D,
Gotcha.
the D Mustang or the D Thunderbolt.
Gotcha. So, they're scheming something.
Yeah, and it's museums do trades all the time.
Exactly.
I mean, it's
just that this one is catching eyes because on paper it seems very lopsided.
Yeah.
But we'd love to hear what you guys think about this, either on our Instagram, Facebook, wherever podcasts can leave comments, I guess. But other than that, that kind of wraps it up for this week's episode.
We appreciate you guys tuning in.
Yeah, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks, guys.
We'll see ya.